She found him on the trail, a quiet cowboy with a broken saddle and tired eyes. Without asking for payment, she mended the leather and wished him well. To her, he was just another wanderer chasing dust and sunsets. But days later, when the ranch changed hands, she stood frozen. The same cowboy rode through the gates, not as a drifter, but as the true heir returning home. And the woman who once helped him had just repaired more than a saddle. She'd mended a destiny. The sky broke open like something wounded. Rain hit the dirt road in sheets, turning dust to mud, mud to rivers that snaked between the wooden posts of a town too tired to fight back. The buildings leaned into the wind, their painted signs faded, their porches sagging under years of drought and disappointment. This was a place where people learned to look down when strangers passed, where questions were swallowed like bitter medicine. But tonight, the rain made everything louder. A single horse moved through the downpour, its hooves sucking at the mud with every step. The rider sat hunched, his hat pulled low, water streaming from the brim in a steady curtain. He didn't look up, didn't scan the windows for light or warmth. He just rode, as if the rain was all he deserved. At the edge of town, a dim glow flickered through a fogged window, the only light still burning. The rider turned his horse toward it, slow, deliberate, like a man who'd run out of choices a long time ago. Inside the small saddlery, Clara Hensley sat at her workbench, her hands moving with the quiet precision of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. Leather strips lay coiled beside her, a needle threaded with waxed cord. The smell of oil and old wood filled the air, mixing with the faint metallic tang of rain seeping through the roof. She didn't mind the leaks anymore. They'd been there since her husband died, and fixing them felt like admitting he was really gone. She paused, needle hovering over the saddle she was patching, listening to the storm hammer the roof. It was the kind of rain that made you think about the past, about mistakes, about words you should have said, but didn't. Then the door crashed open. Clara jumped, the needle slipping from her fingers. Cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of wet earth and horse sweat. A man stumbled through the doorway, drenched, his coat clinging to his shoulders like a second skin. He caught himself on the doorframe, breathing hard, and for a moment neither of them moved. She saw his face, pale, shadowed, exhausted, and something in his eyes that looked like he'd been running for longer than tonight. His voice cracked. He cleared his throat, tried again. I need help. Clara stood slowly, her hand instinctively reaching for the leather punch on the bench. Not a weapon, but close enough. What kind of help? He lifted something from his side, a saddle, torn and muddied. The leather split down the center. One stirrup hung by a thread, but even through the damage, Clara could see the craftsmanship. The stitching was intricate, deliberate, done by hands that knew their trade, and there, barely visible under the grime, was a brand mark, a running horse, etched into the leather. Her breath caught. She'd seen that mark before, years ago, on saddles that came through her father's shop, back when the Callahan Ranch still stood proud on the ridge before the family tore itself apart and the land went silent. The stranger swayed on his feet, and Clara moved without thinking, catching his arm before he collapsed. Sit down, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Before you fall down. He let her guide him to the bench, his weight heavy against her shoulder. Up close, she could see the exhaustion carved into his face, the kind that didn't come from one hard ride, but from years of carrying something too heavy to name. She grabbed a blanket from the back room, draping it over his shoulders, then moved to close the door against the storm. The wind fought her, but she shoved it shut, the latch clicking into place like a small victory. When she turned back, he was staring at the saddle in his lap, his fingers tracing the torn leather with a gentleness that didn't match the roughness of his hands. How bad is it? He asked quietly. Clara crossed her arms, studying him. Bad enough, but fixable. He nodded, still not looking at her. How much? Depends. Where'd you get it? His jaw tightened. It's mine. That's not what I asked. He finally lifted his eyes to hers, and for a second she saw something flicker there. Pain, maybe, or guilt. Doesn't matter where it came from, just matters if you can fix it. Clara held his gaze a moment longer, then sighed. I can fix it. But not tonight, and not if you pass out on my floor. She moved to the stove in the corner, stirring the embers back to life, adding a few pieces of wood until the flames caught. The warmth began to spread, slow and steady, pushing back the chill. She filled a tin cup with water from the pitcher, handing it to him. He took it without a word, drinking slowly, like he'd forgotten what it felt like to be cared for. Clara sat across from him, her arms resting on her knees. "You got a name?" He hesitated. "Eli." "Eli what?" "Just Eli." She nodded, not pushing. People came through this town with half names all the time, carrying their secrets like extra weight. She'd learned not to pry. But that saddle, that mark, it pulled at something in her memory, something unfinished. "Where you headed?" she asked. "Nowhere particular." "That's so." He looked at her then, really looked, and she saw the ghost of a smile. "You always this curious?" "Only when strangers show up in the middle of a storm carrying saddles that look older than they are." His smile faded. "I'm not here to cause trouble. Didn't say you were." The fire crackled between them, filling the silence. Outside, the rain kept falling, relentless, as if the sky had been holding it back for months and finally gave in. Clara stood, moving back to her workbench. She picked up the saddle, turning it over in her hands, her fingers tracing the stitching. The craftsmanship was undeniable. Someone had poured hours into this, maybe days. And the brand mark, that running horse, it was faded but unmistakable. "Who taught you to make saddles?" she asked, not looking at him. "My father. He's still around?" "No." She glanced over her shoulder. His face had gone still, unreadable. "I'm sorry." He didn't respond. Clara set the saddle aside, wiping her hands on her apron. "You can stay here tonight. There's a cot in the back. Not much, but it's dry." Eli shook his head. "I don't want to be a burden." "You already are," she said, but her tone was softer now. "Might as well make the most of it." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Thank you." She led him to the back room, a cramped space filled with leather scraps, old tools, and a narrow cot pushed against the wall. It smelled like oil and dust, but it was warm, and the roof didn't leak. "I'll wake you when the coffee's ready," she said, turning to leave. "Clara." She paused, glancing back. "Your name," he said quietly. "I heard it on the sign outside, and just wanted to say it right." She felt something shift in her chest, small, almost imperceptible, but she pushed it down. "Get some sleep, Eli." She closed the door behind her, leaning against it for a moment, her heart beating a little faster than it should. There was something about him, something familiar and unsettling all at once. Back at her workbench, she picked up the saddle again, her thumb brushing over the brand mark, the running horse. She'd only seen a handful of saddles with that mark, all of them tied to the Callahan ranch, back before the family fell apart, before the fire, before the land went quiet. She thought about the rumors she'd heard years ago, about the Callahan boys, one loyal, one lost, about the inheritance that was fought over and never settled, about the youngest son who disappeared the night the old man died. Clara set the saddle down carefully, her hands trembling just a little. Outside, the storm began to ease. The thunder rolled away toward the hills, leaving only the steady patter of rain against the roof. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out, its voice thin and lonely. Clara sat at her bench, staring at the saddle, and wondered what kind of man showed up in the rain carrying a piece of history he couldn't explain. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she worked by lamplight, her needle moving through the torn leather with slow, deliberate care. She didn't know why she was fixing it now, why it felt urgent. Maybe because the saddle felt like it carried more than just wear and tear. Maybe because the man in her back room looked like he'd been running from something for so long, he'd forgotten how to stop. By the time the first light of dawn crept through the window, the saddle was mended. Not perfect, but whole. The stitching held firm, the leather oiled and smoothed. She ran her fingers over the brand mark one last time, then set it aside. When Eli emerged from the back room, his hair still damp, his eyes clearer but still guarded, he stopped when he saw the saddle on the bench. "You didn't have to." "I know," Clara said, pouring 2 cups of coffee. "But I did." He crossed the room slowly, picking up the saddle, turning it over in his hands. His expression didn't change, but she saw the way his fingers tightened around the leather, the way his throat worked as he swallowed. "How much do I owe you?" he asked, his voice rough. Clara handed him a cup. "Nothing. I don't take charity. It's not charity, it's a courtesy." She met his eyes. "You look like you needed it." He stared at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Thank you." They drank their coffee in silence, the morning light spilling across the floor, turning the dust motes into tiny stars. Outside, the world was still wet, still quiet, but the storm had passed. Eli set his cup down, slinging the saddle over his shoulder. I should go. Clara didn't stop him. But as he reached the door, she spoke. That mark on your saddle. The running horse. He froze, his hand on the latch. I've seen it before, she said quietly. A long time ago. He didn't turn around, and I don't ask questions I don't want answered. He was silent for a moment, then opened the door. The cool morning air rushed in, carrying the smell of rain-soaked earth and new grass. Thank you, Clara, he said, and stepped outside. She watched him walk to his horse, watched him secure the saddle, watched him mount, and turn toward the ridge in the distance. The ridge where the old Callahan ranch still stood, empty and silent. And as he rode away, disappearing into the morning mist, Clara felt something she hadn't felt in years. Curiosity. And maybe, just maybe, hope. But when the rain stopped, the silence between them began to speak louder than the thunder had. The days that followed moved like slow water. Clara woke each morning to the smell of coffee already brewing, the sound of wood being split in the yard, the quiet rhythm of someone who didn't need to be asked. Eli had returned the second day, his horse tied to the post outside, his expression uncertain. I can pay you back, he'd said, standing in the doorway like he didn't belong, for the saddle. And the night. Clara had been elbow-deep in a repair, her hands stained with leather oil. She'd looked up, studying him. How? Work? Whatever you need. She'd hesitated, taking in a drifter, a man with no name and a saddle that carried ghosts, was the kind of thing that made people talk, and in a town this small, talk was currency. But she'd seen the way he handled the saddle, the care in his touch, and she'd heard the exhaustion in his voice when he said thank you, so she'd nodded. All right, but just until you're square. That had been 5 days ago. Now the mornings had rhythm. Eli chopped wood while Clara opened the shop. He hauled water from the well while she stoked the fire. They worked in silence mostly, the kind that felt less like strangers and more like two people who'd learned not to waste words. The townsfolk noticed. Mrs. Fletcher, who ran the general store, leaned over her counter when Clara came in for thread. Heard you took in a drifter. Clara kept her eyes on the spools. He's working off a debt. Mrs. Fletcher's tone carried judgment wrapped in curiosity. Where's he from? Didn't ask or didn't want to know. Clara picked a spool of wax thread, setting it on the counter. Either way, it's my business. Mrs. Fletcher sniffed but rang up the purchase. Just be careful, Clara. Men like that, they're running from something, and whatever they're running from has a way of catching up. Clara paid, nodded, and left without another word. But the comment stayed with her. Back at the shop, Eli was in the yard, sanding down a saddle tree she'd been meaning to replace for weeks. His sleeves were rolled up, his movements steady and practiced. She watched him for a moment from the doorway, noticing the way he checked the grain of the wood, the way he adjusted his grip to match the curve. You've done this before, she said. He glanced up, wiping sweat from his brow. Some. More than some. He didn't respond, just went back to sanding. Clara crossed the yard, sitting on the bench beside him. You don't have to hide it, you know. That you're good at this. I'm not hiding anything. Then why do you work like someone who's trying to forget? His hands stilled. He set the sandpaper down, his jaw tight. Because maybe I am. She didn't push, just sat with him in the quiet, the sun warm on her shoulders, the smell of wood shavings in the air. After a while, Eli spoke again. You ever lose something you thought you'd have forever? Clara looked at her hands, at the calluses and scars from years of work. My husband. 3 years ago. I'm sorry. Me too. She paused. But I'm still here. That has to count for something. He looked at her then, really looked, and something in his expression softened. Yeah, it does. That night, Clara made stew. Nothing fancy, just potatoes and carrots and a little salt pork. They ate at the small table in the corner of the shop, the lamplight flickering between them. Eli ate slowly, like he was savoring it, like he hadn't had a meal someone else made in a long time. This is good, he said quietly. It's just stew. It's more than that. She didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded. After dinner, Eli carried the dishes to the basin, washing them without being asked. Clara watched him, surprised by the domesticity of it, by how natural it felt to have someone else in her space. You don't have to do that, she said. I know. Then why? He dried his hands on a towel, turning to face her. Because you didn't have to help me. And I don't forget kindness. The words hung in the air, simple and true. Clara felt something shift again. That same small, imperceptible thing from the night he arrived. She pushed it down, focusing on the saddle she still had to finish. But it stayed there, like an ember waiting for wind. The next morning, a group of riders passed through town, ranch hands from the big spread to the north. They stopped at the saloon, their voices loud, their laughter rough. Clara heard them from across the street, and something about their presence made her uneasy. Eli heard them too. He stopped mid-swing with the axe, his body going still. You know them? Clara asked. No. But the way he said it, flat, careful, told her he was lying. One of the riders, a tall man with a scar across his cheek, glanced toward the saddlery. His eyes lingered on Eli, narrowing. Then he said something to the others, and they all turned to look. Clara stepped closer to Eli. Maybe you should go inside. I'm fine. Eli. I said I'm fine, but his hands were clenched around the axe handle, his knuckles white. The riders mounted up, their horses kicking dust as they rode out of town. But the scarred man looked back once, his gaze sharp and knowing. When they were gone, Eli exhaled slowly, setting the axe down. You want to tell me what that was about? Clara asked. No, too bad. I'm asking anyway. He turned to face her, his expression guarded. You ever make a choice you couldn't take back? Every day. Then you know why I don't talk about it. Clara crossed her arms. I also know that secrets have a way of coming out. Usually at the worst time. Eli looked away, toward the ridge in the distance. I know. She wanted to press, to demand answers, but something in his voice stopped her. Whatever he was carrying, it was heavier than anger or shame. It was grief, so she let it go. For now. That afternoon, a young boy came to the shop leading a pony with a broken bridle. Clara recognized him, Tommy, the blacksmith's son. Can you fix it, Miss Clara? The boy asked, his eyes wide and hopeful. Of course. She took the bridle, examining the tear. Give me a few minutes. While she worked, Eli crouched beside the pony, running his hand along its neck. The animal leaned into his touch, calm and trusting. Tommy watched, fascinated. You're good with horses, mister. Eli smiled. A real smile, small but genuine. Horses are easier than people. Why? Because they don't judge you for where you've been. The boy thought about that, then nodded. Makes sense. Clara finished the repair, handing the bridle back. Tommy paid with a handful of coins his father had given him, then led the pony away, waving over his shoulder. When he was gone, Clara turned to Eli. You're good with kids, too. Kids don't ask complicated questions. True. She paused. But they notice kindness. Eli looked at her, and for a moment the walls he kept so carefully built seemed to crack. So do you. She didn't respond. Just went back to work, her heart beating a little faster. That night, after Eli had gone to the cot in the back, Clara sat at her bench, working on a saddle she'd been commissioned to make. Her hands moved automatically, stitching and oiling, but her mind was elsewhere. She thought about the way Eli looked at the ridge, the way his hands tightened when the riders passed, the way he smiled at the boy but flinched when someone asked his name. He was running. That much was clear. But from what? And why did she care so much? She set the needle down, staring at the saddle. It was good work, solid, dependable. The kind of thing that lasted. Maybe that's what she was hoping for. Something that lasted. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. Clara stood, moving to the window, looking out at the dark ridge in the distance. Somewhere out there was the answer, the truth about who Eli was and why he'd come. But as she stood there, watching the stars flicker above the hills, she realized she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Because once you knew the truth, you couldn't unknow it. And some truths had a way of breaking things you didn't know could break. She closed the shutters, turning back to the lamp, and whispered into the quiet, "Who are you, Eli?" But the only answer was the wind. And as dawn painted the valley gold, the ridge called to him, not with welcome, but with memory. The mornings stretched longer now, the light softer. Spring was creeping in, slow and careful, like it didn't trust the land not to bite back. Wildflowers dotted the hills, pale yellows and purples pushing through the stubborn earth. The air smelled different, less like dust and more like rain that hadn't fallen yet. Clara woke earlier than usual, the sky still gray, and found Eli already outside, sitting on the fence rail, staring at the ridge. He did that sometimes. Just sat there, still as stone, his eyes fixed on the distant hills like he was waiting for something to appear. Or disappear. She poured 2 cups of coffee, carrying one out to him. He took it without looking, his hands wrapping around the warmth. "You ever been up there?" she asked, nodding toward the ridge. "A long time ago. What's up there?" "Nothing anymore." She sipped her coffee, watching the way the light caught the edges of the hills, turning them gold. "Doesn't look like nothing. Looks can lie." Clara glanced at him. His jaw was tight, his eyes distant. "You know what I think?" "What?" "I think you're not running from something. I think you're running toward it. And that scares you more." He finally looked at her, and for the first time, she saw something raw in his expression. Not anger, not fear, just exhaustion. "What if what I'm running toward doesn't want me back?" he asked quietly. "Then you deal with it, same as everyone else." He almost smiled. "You make it sound easy. It's not, but standing still is harder." They sat in silence, the coffee cooling in their hands, the world waking up around them. A hawk circled overhead, its cry sharp and lonely. Eli watched it until it disappeared beyond the ridge. "Thank you," he said finally. "For what? For not asking more than I can give." Clara nodded. "But one day, you're going to have to give it anyway." "I know." The shop fell into a rhythm that felt less like work and more like partnership. Clara handled the accounts and the customers. Eli handled the heavy repairs and the horses. He had a way with the animals, patient, calm, never forcing. She watched him work, noticing the way he spoke to them in low tones, the way they trusted him without question. One afternoon, a rancher brought in a skittish mare, her eyes rolling, her hooves stamping. "She won't let anyone near her," the rancher said, exasperated. "Not since the storm spooked her. I need her saddle broke by next week, but if she keeps acting like this..." "I'll take her," Eli said. The rancher looked doubtful. "You sure?" "Yeah." Eli took the lead rope, speaking softly to the mare, his hands steady on her neck. The horse snorted, tossing her head but didn't bolt. Slowly, carefully, he led her to the pen behind the shop, never rushing, never pulling. Clara watched from the doorway, arms crossed, impressed despite herself. The rancher shook his head. "Never seen anyone handle a horse like that." "He's got a gift," Clara said. "Where's he from?" "He doesn't say." The rancher grunted, tipping his hat. "Well, if he can break that mare, I'll pay double, over the next few days." Eli worked with the horse. Clara would glance out the window and see him in the pen, his movements slow and deliberate, his voice a low murmur. The mare started to calm, her ears flicking forward, her body relaxing. By the end of the week, she was saddled, her head low, her trust earned. The rancher returned, eyes wide. "I'll be damned." Eli handed him the lead rope. She just needed someone to listen. The rancher paid double, like he'd promised, and rode off shaking his head. Clara counted the coins, then handed half to Eli. "What's this for?" he asked. "Your share." "I'm working off a debt." "Debt's paid. This is wages." He stared at the coins in his hand, his expression unreadable. Then he closed his fist around them and nodded. "All right." That night, Clara made bread, the smell filling the shop, warm and yeasty. Eli sat at the table, carving something from a piece of scrap wood. His hands moved with the same precision she'd seen in his saddle work, patient and sure. "What are you making?" she asked, setting the bread down to cool. He held it up, a small horse, mid-gallop, its legs stretched, its mane flowing. "It's beautiful," she said, surprised. "It's just wood." "It's more than that." He set it down on the table, his fingers brushing over the carved mane. "My father taught me. Said, if you can see the shape inside the wood, you can bring it out. You just have to be patient." Sounds like good advice. He was good at advice, not so good at following it. Clara sat across from him, breaking off a piece of bread. What happened to him? Eli was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "He died thinking I'd failed him. Did you?" "I don't know." He looked up, his eyes dark. "Maybe." She wanted to say something comforting, something wise, but the truth was, she didn't know what to say, so she just handed him a piece of bread. "Eat. You look like you haven't had a decent meal in days." He took it, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Yes, ma'am?" They ate in companionable silence, the lamplight flickering between them, the night settling in soft and quiet. The following Sunday, Clara went to church, something she did more out of habit than faith. The building was small, the pews worn, the preacher's voice tired. She sat in the back, half listening to the sermon, her mind elsewhere. When the service ended, she stepped outside, blinking in the bright sunlight. A woman approached her, Mrs. Calloway, the mayor's wife, her expression sharp. "Clara, dear, we need to talk." Clara tensed. "About what?" "About the man you've taken in, Eli, if that's his name." Mrs. Calloway's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "People are talking, Clara. They're saying he's an outlaw. Or worse, people always talk. But what if they're right? What if he brings trouble to your door?" Clara met her gaze evenly. "Then I'll deal with it." Mrs. Calloway sniffed. "You're a stubborn woman, Clara Hensley. I've been called worse." The older woman shook her head, walking away with a huff. Clara stood there for a moment, the sun warm on her face, her heart beating a little harder. She knew the whispers would continue, knew that kindness, in a town like this, was often mistaken for foolishness. But she also knew that Eli wasn't what they thought he was. He was something else, something worth protecting. When she returned to the shop, Eli was in the yard mending a fence post. He looked up when she approached, reading something in her expression. "Trouble?" he asked. "Just talk. About me? About both of us." He set the hammer down, wiping his hands on his jeans. "I can leave. If it makes things easier." "No." The word came out sharper than she intended. She softened her tone. "No. You stay. Clara, I said you stay." He studied her, then nodded. "All right." That night, as the stars came out, bright and endless, Clara sat on the porch, her shawl wrapped around her shoulders. Eli joined her, sitting on the step below, his back against the post. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Always, why did you come back? After that first night you could have kept riding, but you came back." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Because for the first time in a long time, someone looked at me and didn't see what I'd lost. They just saw me." Clara's throat tightened. "And what did you lose?" "Everything." His voice was barely a whisper. "My family, my name, my home, everything." She reached down, her hand brushing his shoulder. "Then maybe it's time you found something new." He looked up at her, his eyes glistening in the starlight. "Maybe." They sat like that for a while, the night wrapping around them, the world quiet and still. And somewhere in the distance, the ridge stood dark against the sky, waiting. But peace never lasts long where old money and old grudges sleep. The heat came early that year. By mid-morning, the sun pressed down like a hand, turning the dirt roads to powder, the air thick enough to chew. Clara wiped sweat from her forehead, her hands stained dark from the leather dye she'd been working with since dawn. Summer was always the busiest season. Ranchers needing repairs before the long drives, travelers passing through with worn tack and empty pockets. Eli was in the yard, his shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows, replacing the hinges on the barn door. His movements were steady, methodical, the kind of work that didn't require thought. But Clara noticed the way he kept glancing toward the road, the way his shoulders tensed whenever hoofbeats echoed in the distance. He'd been like that for days now, watchful, waiting. She set down the bridle she'd been dyeing, wiping her hands on her apron. "You expecting someone?" He didn't look up. "No." "Then why do you keep looking?" "Habit." She crossed the yard, standing in the shade beside him. "Eli, if something's coming, I need to know." He finally met her eyes, and she saw the conflict there, the desire to tell her warring with the instinct to protect her from it. "I don't know if anything's coming," he said quietly. "But if it does, I'll handle it." "That's not what I asked." Before he could respond, the sound of horses, multiple horses, rumbled down the main road. Not the usual slow clip of a farmer's wagon or a lone traveler. This was different. Purposeful. Eli's jaw tightened. He set down the hammer, his hand instinctively moving to his belt, as if reaching for something that wasn't there anymore. Clara turned toward the road, shading her eyes against the sun. 6 riders appeared through the heat shimmer, their horses dark and powerful, their saddles gleaming with brass fittings. They rode in formation, confident, like men who owned the ground they crossed. At the front was a man Clara recognized immediately, Jed Callahan. Her breath caught. She hadn't seen Jed in years, Not since the old ranch went quiet. He'd been younger then, leaner, still carrying the uncertainty of a man trying to fill boots too big for him. But now he sat tall in the saddle, his face weathered and hard, his eyes sharp as cut glass. Behind him rode his men, ranch hands from the look of them, but the kind who did more than mend fences and brand cattle. They pulled up in front of the saddlery, dust swirling around their horses' hooves. Jed dismounted slowly, his gaze sweeping over the shop, the yard, and finally landing on Eli. He went perfectly still. "Well, I'll be damned," Jed said, his voice carrying across the yard. "Elijah Callahan." In the flesh. Clara's heart dropped. Eli didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, his face carved from stone. Jed walked closer, his boots crunching on the gravel. "Thought you were dead, little brother. Or at least had the sense to stay gone." The words hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. Clara looked between them, her mind racing. Brother. Eli's last name was Callahan, the same family that owned the ranch on the ridge, the same family that tore itself apart over land and money and pride. Eli was a Callahan, and she'd never known. Jed stopped a few feet away, his hands resting on his belt, his expression a mixture of surprise and something darker. "What are you doing here, Eli? Come back to beg for scraps?" "I'm not here for you," Eli said, his voice low and steady. "No? Then what? Hiding out in some widow's shop, playing at being a common hand?" Jed glanced at Clara, and she saw the dismissal in his eyes. Pathetic. One of the ranch hands laughed, a rough, ugly sound. Clara stepped forward, her hands clenched at her sides. "He's not hiding. He's working. Now, unless you need something fixed, I suggest you move along." Jed turned to her, eyebrows raised. "You don't know who you're sheltering, do you?" "I know enough. Do you?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You know he's the youngest son of Marcus Callahan? That he walked away from the richest spread in 3 counties because he didn't have the stomach for what it took to keep it? That's not what happened," Eli said, his voice tight. "Isn't it?" Jed took a step closer. "You left, Eli. The night the old man died, you saddled up and rode out like a coward. Left me to clean up the mess. Left me to fight off the creditors and the vultures and everyone who thought they could take what was ours. It was never yours." The words came out sharp, cutting. Jed's expression darkened. "What did you say? You heard me." Eli's hands were shaking now, but his voice stayed steady. "The ranch was supposed to be divided. That's what the will said. But you burned it. You took everything and called it yours. I saved it," Jed snarled. "While you were off feeling sorry for yourself, I kept that ranch alive. I made it profitable. I turned it into something that mattered. You built it on a lie, and you ran because you couldn't handle the truth." Jed's voice dropped, venomous. "You always were weak, Eli, just like Ma said." Eli flinched, and Clara saw the pain flash across his face. Old wounds, deep and still bleeding. She moved to stand beside him, her presence a quiet declaration. Jed noticed. His eyes narrowed. "You really don't know, do you? The man you're defending, he's not who you think he is." "I know exactly who he is," Clara said, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her chest. "He's a good man, which is more than I can say for most." One of the ranch hands shifted in his saddle, his hand resting on the rifle strapped to his side. Clara saw it, and so did Eli. "Jed," Eli said quietly, "let it go." "I'm not here to fight you." "Then what are you here for?" Eli didn't answer. Couldn't. Because the truth was, he didn't know. Jed stared at him for a long moment, then shook his head. "You're a fool, Eli, you always were." He turned to his men. "Let's go, we've got real work to do." They mounted up, the horses stamping and snorting, but before they rode off, Jed looked back one last time. "You stay away from the ranch, you hear me? You gave up your right to that land. You don't get to come back now and pretend it's yours." Eli said nothing. Jed spurred his horse, and the riders thundered down the road, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. When they were gone, the silence felt deafening. Clara turned to Eli, her heart pounding. "Why didn't you tell me?" He wouldn't look at her. "Because it doesn't matter." "Doesn't matter. Eli, you're a Callahan. That ranch, that's your family's land, was my family's land. It's not anymore. Because your brother stole it? Because I walked away." He finally met her eyes, and she saw the shame there, raw and unguarded. "I walked away, Clara. I had a chance to fight for it, and I didn't. So yeah, maybe Jed's right. Maybe I am a coward. You don't know what I did. His voice cracked. You don't know what I didn't do. He turned and walked toward the barn, his shoulders hunched, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. Clara stood there, her mind spinning, her heart aching for him. Around her, the town had gone still. She could feel the eyes watching from behind curtains, the whispers already starting. By nightfall, everyone would know. The widow had taken in a Callahan, the lost son, the one who'd abandoned his birthright. She closed her eyes, exhaling slowly. Then she turned and followed him. She found him in the barn, sitting on an overturned crate, his head in his hands. The sunlight filtered through the gaps in the wood, casting stripes of gold across the floor. Clara sat beside him, close but not touching. Talk to me. What's there to say? The truth. All of it. He was quiet for a long time. Then, slowly, he began to speak. My father was a hard man. Fair, but hard. He built that ranch from nothing. Every fence post, every building, every head of cattle. And he loved it. Loved it more than anything. More than us, maybe. Eli's voice was hollow. When he got sick, he made a will. Said the ranch would be split between me and Jed. Equal shares. But Jed didn't want equal. He wanted it all. What happened? The night my father died, Jed and I fought. He said I was too soft, too weak to run a ranch. Said I'd ruin everything our father built. And maybe he was right. I didn't have the stomach for the things he did. The shortcuts, the deals with men who'd cut your throat for $1. He looked at her, his eyes red-rimmed. So when he told me to leave, I did. I took my horse, my saddle, and I rode out. Figured it was better to lose the land than lose myself. Clara's chest tightened. And the will? Jed burned it, claimed it never existed. Without proof, I had no claim. And he swallowed hard. I didn't fight him. I just left. That doesn't make you a coward, Eli. That makes you human. Tell that to everyone. In town. He laughed bitterly. By tomorrow, they'll all know. The Callahan boy who ran. The one who didn't have the guts to fight for his own blood. Let them talk. Clara, let them talk. She reached for his hand, her fingers wrapping around his. You came here broken, and you've spent every day since trying to put yourself back together. That takes more courage than fighting ever could. He stared at their joined hands, his throat working. I don't deserve you. That's not your call to make. For a moment, they just sat there, the barn quiet around them, the world outside already turning against them. Then Clara stood, pulling him to his feet. Come on, we've got work to do. Clara, I said, we've got work. She met his eyes, her expression fierce. You're not running this time, and neither am I. Something shifted in his face. Surprise, maybe, or hope. He nodded. All right. They walked back to the shop together, side by side, their shadows stretching long in the afternoon sun. But by evening, the damage was done. Mrs. Fletcher refused to sell Clara thread, her face pinched with disapproval. The blacksmith looked the other way when Eli passed. And when Clara went to the general store for supplies, the whispers followed her like flies. Callahan's boy thought he was dead. What's she thinking, keeping him around? Clara bought what she needed and left without a word, her jaw set, her hands trembling only when she was out of sight. That night, Eli packed his saddlebag. Clara found him in the barn, his belongings rolled tight, his expression resigned. What are you doing? She asked. What I should have done days ago. Eli, no, I'm making it worse for you, Clara. You see that, don't you? Every day I stay, they'll turn on you more. You'll lose customers, lose respect, lose everything you've worked for. I don't care. You should. She crossed the space between them, grabbing his arm. I don't care what they think. I care about what's right. And you leaving? That's not right. It's the only way. No, it's the easy way. Her voice broke. And you're better than that. He stared at her, his resolve cracking. Why are you doing this? Because someone has to. They stood there, inches apart, the lamplight flickering between them, and for the first time since Jed rode into town, Eli felt something other than shame. He felt seen. All right, he whispered. I'll stay. Clara exhaled, relief flooding through her. Good. But outside, in the dark beyond the barn, a shadow moved. Someone had been watching, and by morning the whole town would know that Clara Hensley wasn't just sheltering a Callahan. She was protecting him. By nightfall, his horse carried him not home, but into the heart of everything he tried to forget. The sun rose red that morning, bleeding through the clouds like a wound. Eli stood at the edge of Clara's property staring at the ridge. He hadn't slept, hadn't even tried. All night, he'd sat in the barn, listening to the wind scrape against the wood, feeling the weight of his name settle back onto his shoulders, like a yoke he'd thought he'd shed. Callahan. The word tasted like ash. Behind him, Clara's door opened. He heard her footsteps crossing the yard, slow and deliberate. She didn't call out, didn't ask what he was doing. She just came and stood beside him, her shawl wrapped tight against the morning chill. "You're thinking about going up there," she said quietly. "Yeah, then I'm coming with you." He shook his head. "This isn't your fight, maybe not, but you're not facing it alone." He looked at her then, really looked, and saw the determination in her eyes. The kind that couldn't be argued with. The kind that made her dangerous and precious all at once. "Why?" he asked. "Why does it matter to you?" "Because you matter to me." The words came out simple, honest, without decoration. "And I'm done pretending that's not true." His throat tightened. He wanted to say something, to tell her she was making a mistake, that caring about him was like building a house on sand. But the words wouldn't come, so he just nodded. They saddled the horses in silence, the morning air sharp and clean. Clara packed water and bread, moving with the efficiency of someone who'd learned not to waste motion. Eli checked the cinches, adjusted the stirrups, his hands steady despite the storm brewing inside him. When they mounted up, the town was just beginning to wake. Smoke rose from chimneys, a rooster crowed somewhere in the distance, and from behind curtains, eyes watched them ride out, the widow and the lost son, heading toward the ridge where ghosts still walked. The ride took over an hour, the land climbing gradually, the grass giving way to scrub and rock. The closer they got to the old ranch, the quieter the world became. Even the birds seemed to hold their breath. Eli hadn't been back in 10 years. 10 years since the night his father died, since Jed's words cut deeper than any knife, since he'd chosen running over fighting. And now, as the ranch came into view, he felt the full weight of those years pressing down on him. The buildings were still standing, barely. The main house sagged in the middle, its porch collapsed on one side, windows broken and staring like empty eyes. The barn leaned at an angle, its roof caved in. Weeds grew thick between the fence posts, and the corral gate hung open, rusted and forgotten. This was what remained of the Callahan legacy. Eli dismounted slowly, his legs unsteady. Clara followed, staying close but giving him space. He walked toward the house, his boots crunching on broken glass and dry leaves. The front door hung open, the wood warped and splintered. He pushed it wider, and it groaned like something in pain. Inside, the air was thick with dust and decay. Furniture lay overturned, moth-eaten curtains hung in tatters. The walls were stained with water damage, and in one corner, the ceiling had collapsed entirely, letting in a shaft of sunlight that illuminated the ruin. But beneath the destruction, Eli could still see it. The long table where they'd eaten dinner, the fireplace where his father would sit, staring into the flames, his face hard and distant. The staircase he and Jed had raced up as boys, their laughter echoing through the halls. All of it, gone, rotted, forgotten. Eli. He turned. Clara stood in the doorway, backlit by the morning sun, her expression gentle. "You all right?" He wanted to say yes, wanted to be strong, but standing in the bones of his childhood, surrounded by the wreckage of everything he'd lost, he couldn't lie. "No." She crossed the room, her hand finding his. "Then let's not stay here." But before they could leave, Eli heard something, a faint creak from upstairs. He froze, his hand tightening around Clara's. "Someone's here," he whispered. They moved to the base of the stairs, listening. Another creak, deliberate, like footsteps trying to stay quiet. Eli climbed the stairs slowly, each step groaning under his weight. Clara followed, her breathing shallow. At the top, the hallway stretched dark and narrow, 3 doors all closed. The sound had come from the farthest one, his father's old room. Eli pushed the door open. The room was in better shape than the rest of the house, though still worn and faded. The bed was still there, stripped of its linens. The wardrobe stood open, empty except for a few moth-eaten coats, and sitting on the floor, surrounded by old papers and ledgers, was a man Eli didn't recognize. The man looked up, startled. He was older, maybe 60, with a weathered face and hands stained with ink. "Who the hell are you?" Eli demanded. The man stood slowly, raising his hands. Easy, son. I'm not here to cause trouble. Then what are you doing in my father's house? The man's eyebrows rose. Your father? Then you must be... He paused, studying Eli's face. You're Elijah. Eli's jaw tightened. How do you know my name? Because I was your father's lawyer. The words landed like a punch. The man gestured to the papers scattered around him. Name Samuel Trent. I handled Marcus Callahan's estate, or tried to anyway. Tried? Clara asked, stepping forward. Trent sighed, sitting back down on the edge of the bed. Your father made a will, Elijah. A proper one, witnessed and signed. He wanted the ranch split equally between you and your brother. He looked up, his eyes tired. But when Marcus died, Jed claimed there was no will. Said the old man died intestate. As the eldest, that gave Jed control of everything. And you just let him? Eli's voice was sharp. I fought it. For months. But without the original document, I had no proof. Jed said it never existed. And since you'd left town, there was no one to challenge him. Eli felt the room tilt. So it's true. The will was real. More than real. It was ironclad. Trent reached into his coat, pulling out a folded piece of paper, yellowed and fragile. And I kept a copy. Clara's breath caught. Eli stared at the paper like it was a snake. Why? He asked hoarsely. Why are you here now? Because I never stopped looking for you. Trent held out the paper. I knew Jed burned the original, but I also knew that if you ever came back, you'd have a right to know the truth. Eli took the paper with trembling hands, unfolding it carefully. The ink was faded but legible. His father's handwriting, precise, authoritative, spelling out exactly what Jed had stolen. To my sons, Jedediah and Elijah, I leave the Callahan Ranch in equal measure. May they honor the land as I have honored it, and may they remember that blood matters more than pride. The last line hit Eli like a fist. Blood matters more than pride. He sank onto the bed, the paper clutched in his hands, his vision blurring. He wanted us to work together, Eli whispered. He wanted us to share it. Yes, Trent's voice was gentle, but Jed wanted more. Clara knelt beside Eli, her hand on his shoulder. What are you going to do? Eli stared at the will, at the proof of everything he'd lost, everything that had been taken from him. With this paper, he could go to the sheriff, could challenge Jed's claim, could take back what was rightfully his. But at what cost? He looked around the ruined room, at the decay and abandonment. This place wasn't a home anymore. It was a tomb. And fighting Jed for it, dragging Clara into a legal battle, turning the town into a war zone. Would that bring back what was lost, or would it just create more ash? I need to think, Eli said finally. Trent nodded, standing. I understand, but you should know, Jed's been expanding, buying up land, pushing out smaller ranchers. He's building an empire on the foundation your father laid, and he's doing it without mercy. That's who he's always been, Eli said bitterly. Maybe. But he's getting worse. People are scared of him. And if someone doesn't stand up... Trent trailed off, letting the implication hang. After the lawyer left, promising to be available if Eli needed him, Clara and Eli stood alone in the ruined house. You could fight him, Clara said quietly. You could take this to the sheriff, get back what's yours. And then what? Become a rancher again? Run this place? Eli gestured to the wreckage around them. Look at it, Clara. It's dead. And so is the life I would have had here. So you're just going to let Jed win? I'm going to let it go. He folded the will carefully, slipping it into his pocket. That's not the same thing. Clara studied him, her expression conflicted. I don't understand. I know. He turned to face her. But if I fight Jed for this land, I become like him. And I've spent 10 years trying not to be like him. What about justice? Justice doesn't bring back the dead, Clara. It doesn't fix what's broken. His voice softened. I came here thinking I'd find answers, but all I found was more questions, and I'm tired of living in the past. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached into her apron pocket, pulling out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. What's that? Eli asked. She unwrapped it slowly, revealing the copy of the will that Trent had left with them. I was going to give this to the sheriff, tonight, without telling you. Eli stared at her. Why? Because I thought you deserved justice, even if you wouldn't fight for it yourself. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. But now I'm not sure. Because maybe you're right. Maybe fighting for something that's already dead just makes more death. She walked to the fireplace, where a few charred logs still lay from a fire long extinguished. She knelt, striking a match from her pocket. Clara, what are you doing? She held the match to the paper, the edges caught, curling and blackening. Choosing you over vengeance? No. Eli moved toward her, but she held up her hand. Let it burn, Eli. Let it all burn. The will turned to ash in her hands, the flames small and quick. When it was gone, she stood, wiping her hands on her apron. Now there's no proof, she said. No claim, no legal battle. Just you and me and the life we choose to build. Eli stared at her, stunned. You just destroyed the only evidence. I know. Clara, that was your protection. If Jed ever comes after you, after us, then we'll face it together, without letting the past dictate who we are. She stepped closer, her voice fierce. I'm done being afraid, Eli, and I'm done letting men like Jed Callahan control the story. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight, his face buried in her hair. You're either the bravest woman I've ever met, or the craziest. Maybe both. They stood like that for a long time. The ruined house, silent around them, the ashes of the will drifting on the breeze that came through the broken windows. Finally, Eli pulled back, his hands cupping her face. We should go, before someone sees us here. But as they walked out of the house, Eli stopped, looking back one last time. This place had haunted him for 10 years, had shaped him, broken him, defined him. But standing here now, with Clara beside him, he realized something. It didn't own him anymore. Goodbye, Pa, he whispered. Then he turned and didn't look back. They rode down from the ridge as the sun climbed higher, the morning bright and clear. And though neither of them spoke, both felt the same truth settling in their bones. The past was ashes, but the future was still unwritten. When they reached the edge of town, Clara pulled her horse up short. Smoke, thick, black smoke, rising from the direction of the saddlery. Eli's heart stopped. No. They spurred their horses forward, racing through the streets. People stood in doorways, staring. Some pointed, others whispered, and when they reached the shop, Eli's worst fear materialized. The saddlery was burning. Flames licked through the roof, roaring and hungry. The front windows had shattered from the heat, and inside Clara's workbench, her tools, her life's work, all of it was being consumed. Clara leapt from her horse, running toward the door. Eli caught her, pulling her back. You can't. My shop. Everything I have is replaceable. You're not. She fought him, tears streaming down her face, but he held her tight, forcing her to watch as the flames devoured everything she'd built. The sheriff arrived with a bucket brigade, but it was too late. By the time they got the fire under control, the saddlery was gone. Just charred beams and ash. Clara sank to her knees in the dirt, her shoulders shaking. The sheriff approached, his hat in his hands. Miss Hensley, I'm sorry. Looks like it started in the back. Could have been an accident, but... He hesitated. Some folks are saying they saw riders leaving town this morning, right around the time the fire started. Eli's blood ran cold. What riders? The sheriff looked uncomfortable. Callahan's men. Clara's head snapped up. Jed did this? I can't prove it. But... The sheriff glanced at Eli. Your brother doesn't like people who stand against him. And word got around about you two going up to the old ranch. Eli felt rage boil up inside him, hot and fierce. He turned toward his horse. Clara grabbed his arm. Where are you going? To finish this? Eli, no. He burned your life, Clara. Our life. He needs to answer for that. And what? You'll kill him? Become exactly what he always said you were? Her voice broke. Don't let him turn you into a monster. Eli stared at her, his chest heaving, his hands shaking with fury. But when he looked into her eyes, he saw not fear, but faith. Faith that he was better than this. Slowly he exhaled, his fists unclenching. All right, he whispered. All right. Clara stood, her legs unsteady, and looked at the ruins of her shop. Then she looked at Eli. We rebuild, she said. Not here, not in a town that watches us burn and does nothing, but somewhere, together. Eli pulled her close, pressing his forehead to hers. Together, and as the smoke rose into the clear blue sky, mixing with the clouds and disappearing, one truth remained. Jed Callahan had taken everything, but he hadn't broken them, and that made him dangerous, because now there was nothing left to lose. But ashes have a way of glowing when the wind shifts, and the wind was changing fast. The days after the fire moved like a funeral procession. Clara stayed with Mrs. Garrett, the seamstress who lived 2 streets over, one of the few people in town who still looked her in the eye. The woman's house was small, cramped, but her heart was bigger than her parlor. She didn't ask questions, just made up a bed and kept the coffee hot. Eli slept in the livery stable, trading work for a corner stall and hay to bed down in. The stableman, a grizzled old-timer named Dutch, didn't say much, but he nodded when Eli showed up with his saddle and asked if he could stay. "Man's got a right to shelter," Dutch had said, spitting tobacco into the dirt. Even a Callahan. The town had turned cold, not hostile. That would have been easier to bear. Just cold. Indifferent. Like Clara and Eli were ghosts passing through, already forgotten. The sheriff came by once, hat in hand, to tell them there was no evidence linking Jed to the fire. "Could have been a spark from the forge," he'd said, not meeting Clara's eyes. "Could have been a lot of things. Could have been arson," Eli had replied flatly. The sheriff had shifted his weight, uncomfortable. "Without proof, my hands are tied. Your hands were tied. The moment you decided Jed Callahan's money mattered more than the truth." The sheriff had left without another word. Now, 3 days after the fire, Eli stood outside the livery at dawn, staring toward the ridge. The anger that had burned so hot had settled into something colder, harder. Resolve. Clara found him there, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders, her hair pulled back in a simple braid. "You're planning something," she said. "No, don't lie to me, Eli." He turned to face her. In the early light, he could see the exhaustion etched into her features, the sleepless nights, the weight of loss, and beneath it all the quiet strength that kept her standing. "I'm not planning anything," he said quietly, "but I'm not running either. Not anymore. Then what? I'm going to face him. Jed. Not with a gun, not with lawyers. Just face him. Tell him he won, that I'm leaving, that he can have it all." Clara's eyes narrowed. "You don't mean that." "I do." He reached for her hand. "Because the only way this ends is if I let go. And I need him to know that. I need him to hear it from me. And you think he'll just let you walk away? I don't know. But I have to try." She was quiet for a long moment, her thumb tracing circles on the back of his hand. Then she nodded. "Then I'm coming with you." "Clara, I said I'm coming." Her voice left no room for argument. "We started this together. We finish it together." They rode out an hour later, the town still sleeping behind them. The sun climbed slow and heavy, turning the sky from gray to gold to a pale, bleached blue. The land stretched out in all directions, endless and indifferent. The Callahan Ranch, the new one, the one Jed had built on the bones of the old, sat in a valley 5 miles north. It was nothing like the ruined homestead on the ridge. This place was alive, thriving. Fences stretched for miles, corrals filled with prime horses, barns freshly painted. The main house was 2 stories, white clapboard with a wide porch, the kind of place that said money and power in equal measure. As they rode up the long drive, ranch hands stopped their work to stare. Word traveled fast in a place like this. They knew who Eli was, knew what he'd come for, or thought they did. Jed was on the porch when they arrived, leaning against the rail with a cup of coffee in his hand, like he'd been expecting them. He watched them dismount, his expression unreadable. "Well, well," he said, setting his cup down. "The prodigal son returns. Again." Eli walked to the base of the porch steps, Clara at his side. He didn't climb them, didn't make himself equal, just stood there looking up at his brother. "I came to tell you something," Eli said. "I'm listening. You win. The ranch, the land, the name. It's all yours. I'm not here to fight you for it. I'm not here to challenge you. I'm just here to say you win." Jed's eyebrows rose. "Just like that?" "Just like that." Jed studied him for a long moment, then laughed, a short, bitter sound. "You think I'm stupid, Eli? You think I don't know what you're doing? I'm not doing anything. I'm letting go. Bullshit." Jed descended the steps slowly, stopping a few feet away. "You went up to the old place. You talked to Trent. You found the will." Eli's jaw tightened. "It doesn't matter. The will's gone. Gone how?" "Burned." Jed's eyes flickered with something, surprise maybe, or suspicion. "You burned it. Does it matter who burned it? It's ash. There's no claim, no proof. You're the sole owner of the Callahan estate, legal and binding." Eli's voice was steady, but Clara could hear the cost of every word. "So I'm done. I'm leaving, and I'm taking Clara with me. We'll go somewhere new. Start over, and you'll never see me again." Jed stared at him, his expression shifting from suspicion to something darker. "You really think it's that easy? That you can just walk away and everything's settled?" "Why wouldn't it be? You got what you wanted. What I wanted." Jed's voice rose. You don't know the first thing about what I wanted. Then tell me. I wanted you to fight, Jed shouted, his composure cracking. I wanted you to come back, to stand up, to be the brother I used to know. Not this broken, pathetic version who rolls over the second things get hard. Eli flinched. You wanted me to be like you. I wanted you to be strong. Jed's hands clenched into fists. But you never were you? Always too soft, too kind, too damn good to do what needed to be done. And what needed to be done, Jed? Steal from your own brother? Burn down a woman's shop to keep your secret safe? I didn't. Jed stopped, his jaw working. I didn't burn anything. Then who did? I don't know, but it wasn't me. Clara stepped forward. Then prove it. Call off your men. Let us leave in peace. Jed turned to her, his eyes cold. You don't get to talk to me, widow. You don't get a say in Callahan business. She gets every say, Eli said, his voice low and dangerous. Because she's the only reason I'm standing here talking instead of burning this place to the ground. The words hung in the air like a threat. Jed's hand moved to his belt where a revolver rested in its holster. Clara's breath caught, but Eli didn't move, didn't reach for a weapon, just stood there unflinching. You won't shoot me, Eli said quietly, because if you do, you prove everything they've ever said about you, that you're a thief and a murderer, and that'll hang you faster than any will ever could. Jed's hand hovered over the gun, his face twisted with rage and something else. Grief, maybe, or regret. Then slowly he let his hand fall. Get out, he said, his voice hoarse. Get off my land, and if I ever see you again, you won't, Eli said. He took Clara's hand, turning toward their horses. But before they could mount up, one of the ranch hands came running from the barn, his face pale. Boss, there's smoke. Everyone turned. On the horizon, a dark column rose into the sky, thick and ominous. Where? Jed demanded. The east pasture. Near the old line shack. Fire's spreading fast. Jed cursed, already moving. Get every man we have. Horses, buckets, everything. The ranch erupted into chaos. Men scrambled for horses, shouting orders, panic spreading like the fire itself. Eli stood frozen, watching the smoke grow darker, thicker. Clara gripped his arm. We should go. This isn't our fight. But Eli was already moving toward his horse. People could be hurt. Eli, I can't just leave, Clara. Not if there's a chance. Then I'm coming too. They rode hard, following the ranch hands toward the smoke. The closer they got, the worse it looked. The fire had started in the dry grass near the line shack and spread with terrifying speed, driven by the wind. Flames leapt and danced, consuming everything in their path. When they arrived, the scene was chaos. The line shack was already engulfed, and two ranch hands were trying to free horses from a nearby corral, the animals screaming and rearing in terror. Eli dismounted, running toward the corral. Clara followed, her heart pounding. Get the gate open, one of the hands shouted. Eli grabbed the latch, but the wood had swollen from the heat. It wouldn't budge. Behind him, the flames roared closer. Move! Clara grabbed an axe from the ground, swinging it at the latch. The wood splintered, and Eli kicked the gate open. The horses bolted, wild-eyed and frantic, disappearing into the smoke. There's someone in the shack, a ranch hand yelled, pointing. Eli's blood ran cold. Through the flames, he could see a figure moving inside, trapped by the collapsing roof. It's Jed, someone shouted. Clara grabbed Eli's arm. Don't! But he was already running. He burst through the door, the heat slamming into him like a fist. Smoke filled his lungs, choking him. Through the haze, he saw Jed on the ground, pinned beneath a fallen beam, his face twisted in pain. Eli! Jed coughed, his voice weak. Get out. Leave me. Shut up, Eli growled. He grabbed the beam, heaving with everything he had. It didn't move. The fire crackled around them, the walls groaning as they began to collapse. Clara appeared beside him, her face covered with her shawl. Together, on 3, 1, 2, 3, they lifted. The beam shifted just enough for Jed to drag himself free. Eli grabbed his brother's arm, hauling him to his feet. Can you walk? I think so. The roof caved in behind them with a deafening crash. They ran, stumbling through the flames, Clara leading the way. The doorway was a wall of fire now, but they plunged through it, the heat searing their skin. They collapsed in the dirt 20 feet away, gasping, coughing, alive. The ranch hands surrounded them, some beating out the flames on their clothes, others staring in disbelief. Jed lay on his back, his breathing ragged, his eyes on Eli. Why did you... Because you're still my brother, Eli said hoarsely. Even if you don't deserve to be. Jed's face crumpled. For the first time in 10 years, Eli saw his brother cry. I'm sorry, Jed whispered. God, Eli, I'm so sorry. Eli said nothing, just sat there, his hand on Clara's shoulder, watching the fire burn itself out. By the time the sun set, the fire was contained. The line shack was gone, and a stretch of pasture had burned black, but the main buildings were safe. The men were exhausted, covered in ash, but alive. The sheriff arrived just before dark investigating the cause. He found it quickly, a lantern deliberately placed, the wick still smoldering. Arson. Who would do this? The sheriff asked. Jed looked at Eli, and in that moment something unspoken passed between them. This wasn't random. Someone wanted the Callahans to burn, both of them. I don't know, Jed said finally, but I'm going to find out. Eli and Clara rode back to town as the stars came out, their bodies aching, their clothes reeking of smoke. You saved him, Clara said quietly. After everything he did to you, you saved him. I didn't do it for him, Eli said. I did it because it was right, and because... He paused, searching for the words. Because hate takes more strength than I have left. Clara leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. I'm proud of you. For what? For being the man your father hoped you'd be. They rode in silence the rest of the way, the night wrapping around them like a blanket, and behind them, on Callahan Hill, the embers glowed in the darkness, waiting, and when the smoke cleared, spring had already begun its quiet return. The first green shoots appeared a week later, not on the ridge, not near the charred remains of the line shack, but in the meadow at the edge of town, where the land sloped gently toward the creek, the same meadow where Clara's father had first built his workshop 40 years ago, before the town grew around it, before time and loss wore everything down. Clara stood at the edge of that meadow now, her arms wrapped around herself, watching the morning light spill across the grass. Behind her, the sound of hammers and saws filled the air, the rhythm of rebuilding. Eli had insisted they start here, not in town where whispers still followed them like shadows, not on the Callahan land where history weighed too heavy, but here, in the space between what was and what could be. A week after the fire on the hill, Jed had come to town. He'd found Eli at the livery stable, hat in hand, his face still marked with burns. They'd stood there in the morning cold, two brothers who'd spent a decade as strangers, neither knowing how to begin. I need to say something, Jed had started, his voice rough. And I need you to let me finish. Eli had nodded, waiting. I was wrong. About everything. Jed's jaw worked, the words clearly costing him. I thought keeping the ranch meant keeping Pa alive. Thought if I could just build it bigger, make it more successful, he'd. I don't know. Be proud. Forgive me for not being enough when he was dying. Jed, let me finish. Jed took a breath. I blamed you for leaving. Told myself you were weak, that you didn't deserve any of it. But the truth is, I was afraid that if you came back, everyone would see what I'd become, what I'd done to keep it all. He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. I didn't burn Clara's shop, but I didn't stop the men who did either. I looked the other way because I thought it would make you leave, and that makes me just as guilty. Eli had been quiet for a long time, then he'd said, Why are you telling me this now? Because you saved my life, and because I'm tired of living like this. Always looking over my shoulder, always wondering when the past is going to catch up. Jed reached into his coat, pulling out a folded document. I had Samuel Trent draw this up. It's a deed for the land where Clara's shop used to be, and the meadow beside it. 20 acres, clear title, it's yours. Eli had stared at the paper like it might bite him. I don't want. It's not about want. It's about making things right. Jed pressed the deed into his hand. Build something there. Something that's yours. And maybe someday we can figure out how to be brothers again. But until then, take this. Please. Eli had taken it. Not because he forgave Jed. Forgiveness was a longer road than either of them knew how to walk yet. But because it was a start. And starts, Clara had told him later, were sometimes all you got. Now, 3 weeks after that conversation, the new workshop was taking shape. It wasn't much yet. Just a frame, bare studs and roof beams, the smell of fresh-cut pine sharp in the air. But it was solid, real, built on ground that belonged to them, not borrowed, not stolen. Eli worked alongside Dutch and 2 other men from town. Quiet men who'd shown up one morning with tools and asked where to start. They didn't explain why they'd come, didn't apologize for standing silent during the fire. They just worked. Clara had set up a temporary station under a canvas tarp, a workbench cobbled together from old lumber, her tools salvaged and borrowed. She was stitching a saddle now, her hands moving with practiced precision, the leather beginning to take shape under her touch. A child's voice called out from the road. "Miss Clara!" She looked up to see Tommy, the blacksmith's son, running toward her with a foal in tow. The little horse pranced and nickered, all legs and curiosity. "Look! Pa says she's mine to train." Tommy beamed, his face flushed with pride. Clara smiled, setting down her work. "She's beautiful. What's her name?" "Haven't picked one yet. Thought maybe you and Mr. Eli could help." Eli walked over, wiping sawdust from his hands. He crouched beside the foal, running his hand along her neck. The animal leaned into his touch, already trusting. "What about Hope?" Eli said quietly. Tommy considered this, then nodded solemnly. "Hope, I like that. Good name for a good horse." Eli stood, ruffling the boy's hair. "You take care of her, you hear?" "Yes, sir." The boy led the foal away, his voice carrying back to them as he whispered the name over and over, trying it out. Clara moved to stand beside Eli, watching the boy disappear down the road. "Hope," she murmured. "That what we're building here?" "Maybe." He looked at her, his expression soft. "Or maybe we're just building a place where hope can grow. Sounds like the same thing to me." He smiled, a real smile, the kind that reached his eyes, and pulled her close. The weeks that followed moved with purpose. The frame went up, then the walls, then the roof. Clara worked inside while the men worked outside, and slowly the workshop became more than lumber and nails. It became a place. She hung her tools on pegs Eli had carved, set up her bench in the light from the south-facing window, organized leather and thread, and the 100 small things that made a saddle more than just strips and stitches. And people came, not in a flood, but in a trickle. The rancher whose mare Eli had gentled, Mrs. Garrett with a bridle that needed mending, even Mrs. Fletcher from the general store, her expression stiff but her voice sincere when she asked if Clara could repair her husband's old saddle. "I'm sorry," Mrs. Fletcher said quietly, not meeting Clara's eyes, "for the things I said, for not standing with you when I should have." Clara took the saddle, running her fingers over the worn leather. "We all do what we think we have to. What matters is what we do after." Mrs. Fletcher nodded, tears in her eyes. "Thank you." Word spread, slow but steady, that the widow and the Callahan boy were building something worth seeing, and more than that, something worth supporting. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the meadow gold, Jed rode up. Eli met him at the edge of the property, his posture cautious. They'd seen each other twice since the fire, both times brief and careful, like men learning to walk on new legs. "Came to see the place," Jed said, dismounting. "If that's all right." "It's all right." They walked the property together, Jed taking in the workshop, the corral Eli had started building, the garden Clara had planted near the creek. He didn't say much, just looked, his expression unreadable. Finally, he stopped, staring at the workshop. Above the door, Eli had carved a sign, simple, clean, the letters deep and sure. Hensley and Callahan, saddle makers. Jed's throat worked. "You kept the name. It's who I am, whether I wanted it or not. And Hensley, that's who we are now, together." Jed nodded slowly. Then he reached into his saddlebag, pulling out a piece of leather, old and carefully preserved. "I found this in the main house. Thought you might want it." Eli took it, his breath catching. It was a leather swatch, stamped with the running horse, the Callahan brand. But beside it, in his father's hand, were words Eli had never seen before. "A man's legacy is not the land he keeps, but the kindness he gives." Eli stared at the words, his vision blurring. Where was this? In his Bible, hidden in the pages. Jed's voice was rough. "I found it last week. Think maybe he meant for us to find it together. But since we couldn't," he trailed off, shrugging. Eli traced the letters with his thumb. "Thank you. Yeah." Jed cleared his throat, stepping back. "I should go. Just wanted you to have that." "Jed," his brother turned. "You want to stay for supper?" Eli asked. "Nothing fancy, just stew. But there's enough." Jed's eyes widened, surprised. For a moment he looked like the boy Eli remembered. Uncertain, hopeful. You sure? I'm sure. They ate on the porch of the workshop, the three of them, Clara, Eli, and Jed, sitting on crates and overturned buckets, bowls balanced on their knees. The stew was simple, but it was warm, and the conversation was careful, but it was real. Jed told them about the ranch, about the new foals and the summer drive coming up. Clara told him about the orders that were starting to come in, about the saddle she was making for a rancher 2 counties over, and Eli just listened, watching his brother and the woman he loved talk like ordinary people, like the weight of the past wasn't crushing them. When Jed finally rode off, the stars were out, bright and infinite. Clara leaned against Eli, her head on his shoulder. Think you two will be all right? Someday. Not today, but someday. That's enough. By midsummer, the workshop was finished. They held no grand opening, no ceremony, just opened the doors one Monday morning and got to work. And people came, not out of pity, but out of need. Good saddles were hard to find, and word had spread that Clara Hensley made the best in 3 counties, and that Eli Callahan could gentle a horse no one else could touch. One afternoon, the sheriff rode up, dismounting with a nod. Got a job for you, if you're interested. Clara looked up from her stitching. What kind of job? Been getting complaints. About the saddles we use for the deputies. Cheap, uncomfortable. Thought maybe you could make something better. He paused. Town council approved the expense. If you're willing. Clara glanced at Eli, who nodded. We're willing. The sheriff smiled. A rare sight. Good. Town's better with you two in it. Took us a while to see that, but we see it now. After he left, Clara set down her tools, her hands trembling slightly. Did that just happen? Yeah, we're really part of this town now. Looks like it. She laughed, a sound of relief and disbelief, and threw her arms around him. We did it. You did it, Eli corrected, holding her tight. I just followed. Liar. He kissed the top of her head. Okay. We did it. That night, they walked through the meadow, the grass soft under their feet, the fireflies beginning to rise. The workshop stood solid behind them, lamplight glowing through the windows. Smoke curled from the chimney Clara had insisted they add. Not for the forge, but for warmth in winter, for the evenings they'd spend working side by side. You ever think about what comes next? Clara asked. Sometimes. And I think maybe this is it. Not some grand destiny or legacy. Just this. Work that matters. People who care. You. She stopped, turning to face him. That enough for you? He cupped her face, his thumb brushing her cheek. It's more than enough. It's everything. She kissed him then, soft and sure, and in that moment the past finally let go. They were just 2 people, in a meadow, building a life from scratch, one stitch at a time. The summer rolled on, bringing rain and heat in equal measure. The garden flourished. The horses in the corral grew sleek and strong. And every morning, Clara and Eli woke to the sound of the creek, and the smell of coffee, and the knowledge that they'd chosen each other. And that choice had made all the difference. One Sunday, Tommy came by with Hope, the foal now a yearling, her coat gleaming, her eyes bright. She's ready, Tommy announced proudly. Want to see her work? They watched as the boy put the young horse through her paces, walking, trotting, responding to his cues with trust and intelligence. When he finished, Eli shook his hand. You did good, son. Real good. Tommy beamed. Learned from the best. After he left, Clara sat on the porch rail, watching the meadow sway in the breeze. You know what I think? What? I think your father would be proud. Eli was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into his pocket, pulling out the leather swatch Jed had given him. He'd kept it, tucked close, a reminder. A man's legacy is not the land he keeps, but the kindness he gives. Yeah, he said softly. Maybe he would. That evening, as the sun set and turned the sky to fire, a rider appeared on the road. Clara tensed, but Eli recognized the horse. Jed. He dismounted slowly, his expression uncertain. Hope I'm not intruding. You're not, Eli said. Jed nodded, looking around at the thriving workshop, the horses, the life his brother had built. Came to ask you something. What? Fall gathers coming up. Could use an extra hand. Wondered if. He hesitated. Wondered if you'd want to ride out with us, just for the week. Pay's good, and I'd like to have you there. Eli glanced at Clara, who gave him a small, encouraging nod. All right, Eli said. I'll ride out. Jed's face broke into a smile. Genuine, unguarded. Good, that's good. They shook hands, and for the first time in 10 years, it felt like family. After Jed rode off, Clara moved to Eli's side, slipping her hand into his. "You're really going? Just for a week. Is that all right?" "It's more than all right. It's right." They stood together as the stars came out, the night warm and still. And in the distance, the ridge stood dark against the sky, no longer haunted, no longer heavy. Just land, just memory. The wind moved through the grass like forgiveness, soft and endless, and the world kept turning. Months later, as autumn painted the hills gold and red, a traveler passed through town. A young man, ragged and tired, leading a limping horse. He stopped at the workshop, reading the sign above the door. Clara looked up from her work, saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the desperation. She set down her tools. "Can I help you?" The young man swallowed hard. I need a saddle fixed, but I don't have much money." Clara glanced at Eli, who was crossing the yard, a bucket of water in his hands. He set it down, studying the stranger, seeing himself 10 years ago. "Let's take a look," Eli said gently. The saddle was in rough shape, torn and worn, held together by hope and string. But beneath the damage, Clara saw the craftsmanship, saw the care that had gone into making it. "We can fix it," she said. "How much?" the young man asked, his voice shaking. Clara looked at Eli. He nodded. "Nothing," she said. "It's on the house." The young man's eyes filled with tears. "I can't." "You can. And when you're back on your feet, you pass the kindness on. Deal?" He nodded, unable to speak. They fed him, fixed his saddle, tended his horse. And when he rode out the next morning, Clara and Eli stood on the porch, watching him disappear down the road. "Think he'll be all right?" Clara asked. "Yeah, I think he will." She leaned into him, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders. Behind them, the workshop hummed with quiet purpose. Around them, the meadow stretched green and endless. And above them, the sky opened wide, full of light. The land no longer remembered the feud, only the kindness that mended it. And in the heart of the meadow, where two broken people had chosen to rebuild, life went on. Not perfect, not easy, but good, and that was enough.